Hello and welcome to this online lesson. My name is Mr. Hoven, and today we are going to be looking at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in the United States. That's right, we're starting off the unit with the United States industrializes, and then we'll move on to the railroads and big business and how those big businesses practices impacted people throughout the U.S. and their responses, which became in the form of progressive reforms. But today, we're focusing on industrialization in the United States. Let's get started. So, after the Civil War and during the Civil War, industrial revolution was going on, but it was very slow to start. Although it began in the early 1800s, the Industrial Revolution was very slow because the U.S. was still largely a farming community. It was very based on agriculture, this whole nation. But by 1900, the U.S. had transformed itself into an industrial superpower. And by 1914, the total value of goods and services produced by the country was 8 times greater than it had been in the Civil War. So we start out slow, but we begin to grow. Now, before we get into the industrialization of the United States, I'd like you to take a minute to pause this video and write down in the space provided some ideas. What do you think a country needs to have in order to industrialize? Does it need certain materials? Does it need people to work? What are your thoughts? Just take a minute, pause the video, and write some ideas down. Now, the first thing that a country needs in order to industrialize is an abundance of natural resources. Natural resources are raw materials that naturally occur in nature. The United States contained a vast group of natural resources upon which the industry in the 1800s depended on, including water, timber, coal, iron, and copper. The presence of these resources meant that American companies could obtain them cheaply and did not have to import them from other countries. Many of them were located out west, so as settlements expanded west, many people were able to establish claims on these different materials that were being able to use in factories. The American oil industry also benefited from finding kerosene. It began in western Pennsylvania, where residents had noticed oil bubbling to the surface of areas in springs and streams. And in 1859, Sir Edwin Drake drilled the first oil well near Titusville, Pennsylvania. And by 1900, oil fields from Pennsylvania to Texas had been opened. As oil production rose, it fueled economic expansion. So the first thing a country needs, we need natural resources. Now, another thing, in order to be an industrialized country, you need a workforce. You need people to run the factories. So between 1860 and 1910, the population of the United States almost tripled. So we had vast amounts of human laborers and human resources to use in these factories. It provided with a large workforce, but a large population also creates a greater demand for consumer goods that factories produce. So you've got more people looking to buy things produced in factories. And population growth stemmed from 2 causes: large families living here in the United States and a large flood of immigrants. American industry began to grow at a time when social and economic conditions in China and Eastern Europe convinced many people to leave their nations in search of a better life in the United States. And between 1870 and 1910, roughly 20 million immigrants arrived in the United States. This added to the industrial workforce, again, creating more people to work in the factories and more people to buy goods that came from factories. So another aspect, we've talked about natural resources, we've talked about having a human population to run the factories. Also, it was this idea of laissez-faire economics. And laissez-faire translate as, it's a French phrase, as let do, and also means let people do as they choose. And supporters of laissez-faire believe the government should not interfere in the economy other than to protect private property rights or other kind of big business rights and for individuals. So you've got this laissez-faire where the government is keeping its hands out of big business, pretty much the opposite of what's going on today in the United States. Government stays hands off. So when you hear laissez-faire, think government hands off the big businesses and the economy. So now the business owners, the big business owners, the industrialists, had complete control of their businesses. But think about it. With the business owners having complete control over wages, over working hours, over working conditions, could problems arise? What may they be? Just something to keep in mind as we move on in the unit. So some other things that kind of just help bring about this expansion and industrialization are new inventions. And a flood of important inventions help increase the nation's productive capacity and improve the network of transportation and communication that was vital to the nation's industrial growth. New inventions led to the founding of new corporations, which produced new wealth and new jobs. So, for example, in 1874, a young Scottish immigrant inventor named Alexander Graham Bell suggested the idea of a telephone to his assistant Thomas Watson. And Bell worked until 1876 before he succeeded in transmitting his voice. And he was able to now talk with individuals that weren't right there, and it wasn't as long as a telegraph might be to get somewhere. So again, improving communication. And he went on to form the Bell Telephone Company, which is today known as AT&T. Another great inventor that you've probably heard about in your younger years was Thomas Alva Edison. And he invented such things as the phonograph, the electric light bulb, and electric generator. His companies all merged in 1889 to form the Edison General Electric Company, which was today known as GE. And there were many more different inventions that were brought about during this period of industrialization. Thaddeus Lowe invented the ice machine, the basis of the modern-day refrigerator. In the early 1870s, Gustavus Swift hired an engineer to develop a refrigerated railroad car. And now, meat and produce and goods that need to be kept cold can be shipped across the nation in different parts because they have these refrigerated railroad cars and these railroad lines. Looms and bobbins increased textile production, the mass production of shoes, as you can see in the picture down below, the bobbins and the looms working to produce more cloth for clothing and the like. And telegraph communication improved with a telegraph wire being laid across the Atlantic Ocean, across the pond to our friends in Great Britain. So again, communication is improving, we're able to ship goods faster, and we are just able to improve the quality of life. So that about wraps things up for today. We've talked about what allowed the United States to industrialize. First, we looked at natural resources. Then we looked at human resources, laissez-faire economics, new inventions, and just the development of technology overall. And that's really what allowed the United States to begin industrializing after the Civil War. That's about all we've got for today. Next time, we'll begin talking about the railroads and their impact on the Native Americans, the farmers, and big businessmen in the West. And we'll see you next time.